Hi, and welcome to this talk. This is a case study example showing how the three co's framework can be applied. This example comes from the United Kingdom and is based on developing a research intervention in health services setting. This was a research project to develop an exercise rehabilitation service that would be able to be embedded within the National Health Service to provide treatment for people living with a condition called Postural Tachycardia Syndrome, or POTS for short. So POTS is a long-term health condition caused by a problem with the autonomic part of the nervous system, but tends to impact the ability to pump blood around the body. It ultimately means that when people are upright, their heart rate drastically increases by 30 beats per minute or more and takes longer to recover than normally expected. So it's like they're going for a run when they have just stood up. It can cause people to faint, have heart palpitations, chest pain, issues concentrating, and fatigue. It can be very debilitating, with some people bedbound. Exercise rehabilitation is believed to help, but better evidence is needed. Scientists have created an intervention that they thought would help, but it has caused some issues because it does not completely take into account how people with POTS respond to exercise, and it can make symptoms worse if not careful. This is why this research was started using a co-creation approach. The research is also underpinned by theory and evidence throughout. Researchers and people working in cardiac rehabilitation services started having conversations about the current issues in the field. I was a researcher on this project and also have POTS myself. And we started to put out a public invite over social media, inviting other people with the condition and their family to join conversations with us, so researchers, healthcare professionals, about whether there was actually a need for this research to be carried out. 18 people with POTS, or people who support them, were involved in these discussions and made up the majority of the group in the meetings as a want to gain their experience and expertise to understand whether the research was useful and how to make it as useful as possible. There had been a stigma that people with POTS have not been previously listened to, and so we wanted to ensure that listening to them and the importance of their voice was emphasised. Face-to-face meeting groups were originally considered, but people said that they would prefer teleconferences to enable to include people who are bedbound and couldn't travel to the venue as a result of POTS symptoms. And so 2 teleconferences were held to discuss the idea together. This provided a neutral discussion space for all involved and was with people's voices only, so people did not need to worry about what they looked like to take part. There were only a few people with stronger voices than others, and so we made sure that we encouraged people who had not yet spoken to say what they thought, if comfortable to do so. People could also email us their thoughts afterwards, as well as being open to emails from people who were unable to take part in the teleconferences at the time. This research was decided as an important topic, and there is a big need for any research for people with POTS because it's lacking. There was a discussion over the language of the word exercise because this was seen as a scary word and something that could make POTS symptoms worse if too much high-level exercise is introduced too quickly. And so we agreed to change it to physical activity to be more inclusive of lower-level movement as well. Even though swimming is suggested in the guidance of people with POTS because of the activity completed for other rehabilitation purposes, it was actually warned against by the people with POTS that were in this discussion group because the humidity and quick return of gravity on the body when getting out of the swimming pool afterwards can exacerbate symptoms. It was agreed that recumbent cycling was a good activity. So you can see recumbent cycling in this picture here, where you're sitting down more than being upright on a bike, a normal bike. And it was seen as a good activity to use alongside walking and strengthening activities where appropriate to the individual. It was agreed that it would be useful to support people with psychological strategies alongside the physical activity support. However, because of the large stigmatisation and lack of people being listened to with POTS, they often had incorrectly been told by healthcare professionals that the symptoms they had were all in their head. And so there was a big concern that this was not framed in a way that made people feel that they were being treated for a psychological condition, and ensure that this was acknowledged as a physical condition with some psychological support strategies. So we therefore agreed to call the support sessions lifestyle and behaviour change support. They wanted connection and monitoring from a healthcare professional who was trained and understood the POTS condition and potential complications, and were then happy to continue working on what they had been taught independently alongside the intervention. They wanted some one-to-one sessions with the healthcare professional, but also some group sessions where they could meet other people with POTS and know they're not alone and support each other. And lastly, we discussed what should go into an application to get funding to do this research project, which was successful, and some members involved in the initial stage continued to be involved throughout this funded project. Plus, we worked together to understand who else needed to be involved in order to help make this as likely as possible to be a success moving forward. So after we got the funding, we had a face-to-face session, and that was held with 16 people that were considered as key co-creators, including people with POTS, POTS charity representatives, healthcare professionals diagnosing POTS who could refer patients into a research intervention, professionals who would deliver the intervention, professionals who specialised in treating people with POTS and so could help create intervention materials and train other professionals, hospital coordinators and patient service specialists from the chosen intervention sites, and researchers who specialised in POTS, physical activity, health psychology, intervention development and delivery. Often people involved fitted in multiple categories listed, and so people's expertise and experience was in-depth and crossed over. Academics who specialised in co-creation, design and project management acted as the facilitators of the workshop. It was hosted in a neutral space in a rugby grounds conference meeting room in the Midlands of the UK. This was a new environment to all involved and aiming to level the power of hierarchy across the group. It was easily accessible by transport with free parking provided, travel expenses covered and payment vouchers provided for people's time being involved in the workshop. As this group had now developed from the original co-define session, further co-define activities were carried out with an icebreaker activity to introduce everyone's reasons for being involved, discussing how everyone wanted to engage together, and discussing the limitations that needed to be worked within so that a meaningful outcome was created. The Coventry University Cube was then used to build on some of the issues raised in the co-define teleconferences, and you can find the Cube in the toolkit handbook that we've got in part of this module. Co-creators were split into groups, with each group focusing on a specific concern in depth. For example, worries about the intervention and words or language that might put people off participating in the intervention were covered. Each group was provided with a cardboard cube, as you can see in this picture, on which they could write their thoughts and feelings regarding the intervention. At the end of the cube activity, each group fed back to the room to enable wider discussion. Within this same workshop session, we then moved on to co-design activities to co-create solutions together using the carousel method, which is another method that is described in the toolkit handout in this module. Flip chart paper was stuck up on the walls all around the room, including the big glass windows overlooking the rugby pitch. The co-creators were split up into 3 groups with post-it notes and pens and took it in turns to go to one of the 3 solution-focused areas in the room. Once groups had completed one area, they rotated onto another area, adding to what a previous group had started, building on ideas, and ensuring that everyone had discussed all 3 areas before joining back together as a group to finalise ideas as a consensus. The first area was who and how should be recruited, which led to the creation of an intervention inclusion criteria. The second area was deciding what the actual intervention should look like in detail. And the third area provided a series of different potential outcome measures based on what people has said was important in the first co-defined session. Co-creators looked at the measure in depth and considered what it would be like to complete these as a participant in the research or deliver them as a professional in the intervention. This led to decisions about which objective measures and subjective questionnaires were best to include to measure outcomes in the intervention. The research team were funded to then turn these decisions into a draft protocol, which was agreed and produced for the next plan co-refine workshop. The co-refine workshop was hosted online, inviting the same co-creators back to examine the draft protocol for the intervention. A software called Big Blue Button was used, which allows for presentation slides to be put on the screen and for all people attending to directly interact with and annotate the slides to add their thoughts, as well as writing in the chat box and voicing their thoughts. An icebreaker was used to show people how to use the technology by putting up a map and asking people to directly annotate where they were joining the workshop from. A few tweaks were made and a final version was developed, which led to getting ethical approval to start the intervention and a protocol being published. And then COVID-19 happened, and the lockdown meant that this protocol could no longer be used because it involved research participants coming into the cardiac services in 2 hospitals to receive the intervention, one in London and one in the Midlands in the UK. So, we hosted another co-refine online workshop to further co-refine the intervention to fit with the new challenges and limitations placed upon the system as a result of COVID-19. We used the Big Blue Button software again so that the protocol could be annotated by everyone. This resulted in a published protocol update with solutions to how the intervention could be delivered online using home-based physical activity support. Instead of funding being used to pay for participants' expenses to come into the hospital facility as it originally was planned, it paid for them to be sent equipment to their homes. Online pre-recorded videos were created and live online support sessions were to be provided. A manual prototype for delivery was developed based on this intervention protocol, and staff were trained on the condition on how to use the manual. As feedback was provided from the training, the manual was further refined into the version that was to be delivered in the intervention. There is a publication providing further detail of this co-creation with the co-creators as either co-authors or acknowledged in the publication. The key thing to know is that this will now be tested for its feasibility, and so more feedback will be provided and the intervention will continue to be co-refined. The outcome is by no means finished. However, by co-creating it fully and meaningly from the beginning, the further through the process we are, the more it is about tweaks to the output. We hope that this can provide a clear model on how interventions can be co-created successfully. Here are the references used in this talk, and you can follow the progress of this project on the Heads Together website that you can see at the top there, and the Twitter account and Instagram account as well.